All right, folks, let's dive into the murky depths of the Middle Ages, where we'll meet some of the era's most notorious figures, outlaws, killers, and chaos agents who stumbled into the history books despite themselves. Before we get started, if you enjoy this kind of storytelling, give the video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. It really helps keep the channel going. Also, drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always wild to see how far this journey takes us across the globe. Now, grab a cozy drink, maybe flick on a fan for that soothing white noise, and let's step into the gritty, unpredictable world of medieval mayhem. If you think your life's been a roller coaster, wait until you hear about Eustace the monk, a man who went from holy vows to high seas havoc, irritating two nations so much they both wanted him dead. Born around 1170 near Boulogne in northern France, Eustace started his career in a Benedictine monastery, chasing the quiet life of prayer, fasting, and scratchy robes.
But apparently, the monk's life wasn't thrilling enough for him. After a few years of chanting and plain broth, he ditched the cloister for a career in chaos. Research suggests his departure was sparked by a personal vendetta, specifically a feud with a local noble, Renaud de Damartin, over land disputes and family honor. What began as heated words turned into a full-blown rampage of arson and theft. Eustace didn't just burn bridges, he torched entire estates. When he lost his lands, he didn't sulk. He pivoted to piracy, figuring the open water was a better place to dodge consequences. Eustace became the medieval equivalent of a geopolitical headache, operating in the English Channel like a rogue freelancer. One day, he'd be plundering French ships for England's King John. The next, he'd flip sides, raiding English ports for the French barons. Chroniclers of the time, like the anonymous author of the History of William Marshall, described him as a cunning shapeshifter, slipping through blockades with a knack for disguise, though this might just mean he was good at blending into a foggy coastline.
He also leaned into the era's superstition, boasting of dabbling in black magic to summon storms or control the seas. More likely, he was a master opportunist, timing his raids with bad weather and claiming supernatural credit. By 1217, his antics caught up with him at the Battle of Sandwich, a naval clash off the English coast. Trapped on his ship, Eustace offered a hefty ransom, but the English weren't in a negotiating mood. They beheaded him, and, in a grim 13th century flex, paraded his head on a pike as a warning to other would-be pirates. To the French, he was a roguish hero. To the English, a seafaring menace. To history, he's a reminder that sometimes finding yourself means becoming everyone's problem. Fast forward to 14th century Ireland, where Alice Keichler carved out her own infamous legacy, juggling wealth, power, and accusations of witchcraft while leaving a trail of dead husbands in her wake. Born around 1280 into a prosperous Anglo-Norman family in Kilkenny, Alice was no stranger to privilege. She married into even greater wealth, tying the knot 4 times, each union boosting her fortune and her body count. By the time her 4th husband, Sir John Lepore, died under mysterious circumstances in 1324, whispers of foul play turned into outright accusations. Medieval society wasn't exactly kind to women who outlived their spouses,
and Alice's knack for thriving as a widow raised eyebrows. The Annals of Ireland, a contemporary record, hints that her success as a moneylender and property owner made her a target for envy, especially among Kilkenny's male elite. The charges against her were straight out of a medieval horror story. Locals claimed she cavorted with a demon named Robin Artisan, who allegedly appeared as a black dog, a shadowy figure, or even a cat. She was accused of brewing poisons with herbs and powders, though, to be fair, medieval pharmacology often looked a lot like witchcraft to the untrained eye. Witnesses swore she led a coven, sacrificed animals, and chanted forbidden rituals, accusations that sound suspiciously like exaggerated gossip about her lavish social gatherings. The local bishop, Richard Ledred, a zealous cleric fresh from papal training in Avignon, saw Alice as a perfect scapegoat for his anti-heresy crusade.
Her wealth and independence didn't help her case. In a patriarchal world, a woman with both was practically begging for trouble. Sensing the noose tightening, Alice used her connections and fled to England, possibly to Dublin or London, where she vanishes from the historical record. Her maid, Petronilla de Meath, wasn't so fortunate. Petronilla endured brutal torture and was burned at the stake in 1324, marking Ireland's first recorded execution for witchcraft. The case, detailed in Ledred's own accounts, reflects the era's paranoia about powerful women and the Church's growing obsession with rooting out heresy. Alice's story, equal parts cunning and tragedy, shows how quickly ambition could be twisted into infamy in a world that feared women who played the game too well. Alice Keitler slipped into the shadows after her escape, her fate a mystery that still sparks debate. Some historians speculate she lived quietly in England, perhaps blending into London's bustling merchant class. Others suggest she fled to Flanders, a hub for trade and a safe haven for those dodging ecclesiastical wrath.
One wild theory, backed by no solid evidence but plenty of medieval gossip, claims she remarried, proof of either unshakable confidence or an unquenchable penchant for risky romance. Guilt or innocence wasn't the point in Alice's case. In medieval Europe, a woman with wealth, wit, and a knack for outliving her husbands was already halfway to a witchcraft accusation. Her true offense? Outmaneuvering a system rigged against her for longer than most could dream. In a world where power was a man's game, that kind of cunning was practically otherworldly. If you want a case study in how medieval nobility could spiral from greatness to madness, meet Gilles de Rais, France's golden boy turned nightmare incarnate. Born in 1405 into a powerful Breton family, Gilles was the poster child for everything the Middle Ages admired: noble lineage, battlefield prowess, and a castle so grand it could have doubled as a small city. As a young marshal, he fought alongside Joan of Arc during the 100 Years' War, helping her lift the siege of Orleans in 1429, and earning a reputation as a devout, courageous knight.
Chronicles like the Chronicle of the Siege of Orleans praise his loyalty to Joan, describing him as a steadfast ally who stood by her when others faltered. But after Joan's capture and execution in 1431, something in Gilles snapped. Grief? Trauma? Or perhaps a darkness
that had always lurked beneath his polished armor. Retiring to his estates, Gilles didn't settle for a quiet life. Instead, he built a private theater, staging lavish, bizarre spectacles where he played the hero, the villain, and everything in between, complete with costumes and demonic props. His wealth, inherited and expanded through strategic marriages, funded an increasingly unhinged lifestyle. He surrounded himself with alchemists, astrologers, and charlatans who promised to turn lead into gold or unlock cosmic secrets. The catch? Their rituals often demanded gruesome ingredients. By the late 1430s, whispers spread of missing children. Dozens, possibly hundreds, according to court records from his 1440 trial in Nantes. Locals claimed Gilles conducted occult ceremonies, complete with eerie chants and flickering candles, all in a delusional quest for wealth and power. It's tempting to compare it to a medieval Ponzi scheme, except the stakes were far bloodier. When the church and local authorities finally intervened, Gilles was arrested, and his interrogation leaned heavily on torture, standard for the time as noted in historical accounts like those of Jean Chartier. Under duress, he confessed to murder, sorcery, and a litany of sins, though historians like Georges Bataille argue some charges were exaggerated to paint him as a monster and justify seizing his wealth. In 1440, Gilles was hanged and burned, his name struck from noble records. To some, he was France's first serial killer. To others, a scapegoat for a corrupt elite desperate to deflect scrutiny. Either way, his fall from Joan of Arc's comrade to the church's public enemy number one is a stark reminder. Even heroes can plummet into infamy when power and madness collide. Before Robin Hood became the poster boy for stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, there was Hereward the Wake, England's original rebel with a cause, though his cause was mostly rage. Born around 35, Hereward was a Saxon noble in Anglo-Saxon England, a world upended when William the Conqueror's Normans swept in during 1066. While most Saxons bowed to the new regime, trading their lands for survival, Hereward wasn't having it. The Gesta Herewardi, a 12th century chronicle, paints him as a man who saw his family's estates confiscated and decided diplomacy was overrated. Instead, he rallied a band of disgruntled Saxons and launched a one-man insurgency from the fens of Ely, a swampy stronghold in eastern England. Hereward's campaign was less about chivalry and more about controlled chaos. He led guerrilla raids on Norman outposts, torched villages loyal to the invaders, and even liberated monasteries, medieval code for looting them while claiming divine approval. His nickname, the Wake, likely meant the Watchful, a nod to his knack for evading capture, though it could also describe the trail of destruction he left behind. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle calls him both a patriot and a terror, depending on who's writing. His finest hour came when the Normans tried to invade Ely by constructing causeways through the treacherous marshes. Hereward waited until they were knee-deep in mud, then set the structures ablaze, turning their advance into a fiery disaster. Picture Norman knights flailing in a burning swamp, Hereward's version of a mic drop.
His rebellion didn't change history, but it made the Normans sweat, proving one angry Saxon could be a royal pain in the crown. For a time, Hereward the Wake was a force of nature,
a swamp-soaked rebel who made the Normans regret ever setting foot in England. From his marshy fortress in Ely, he struck like a vengeful spectre, outwitting armies with guerrilla tactics and a deep knowledge of the treacherous fens. The Gesta Herewardii describes him as a master of hit-and-run warfare, vanishing into the mists before his enemies could regroup. But even the fiercest rebellions have an expiration date, and medieval logistics were as unforgiving as a winter storm. By 1071, the Normans got smart, or desperate, and started bribing Hereward's allies, turning loyalty into a commodity. They overran his base, forcing him to scatter into the wilderness. His end is shrouded in mystery. Some accounts, like those in the Liber Eliensis, claim he was cut down by bounty hunters in a final betrayal. Others suggest he faded into obscurity, perhaps plotting one last strike that never materialized.
To the Saxons, Hereward became a folk hero, the unbowed spirit of a lost England. To the Normans, he was a nightmare used to quiet rowdy children. To historians, he's a testament to defiance in an age when resistance often meant a lonely, muddy grave. Scotland's contributions to the world are legendary. Think whiskey, bagpipes, and a climate that makes optimism a daily challenge. But in the misty 15th century, it allegedly gave us Sawney Bean, a figure so grotesque that even medieval scribes wrote about him with a shudder, half hoping the tale was fiction. According to folklore, preserved in sources like the Newgate Calendar, Sawney, born Alexander Bean, rejected the grind of honest labor, a sentiment not uncommon among the era's idle nobles. With his wife, Agnes, he set up shop in a secluded coastal cave near Ballantrae in Ayrshire, chosen for its inaccessibility and lack of prying eyes. There, they launched a family enterprise that makes modern crime syndicates look tame, ambushing travelers, robbing them, and, most chillingly, eating them.
Over decades, the Beans allegedly raised a sprawling clan, up to 48 children and grandchildren, per some accounts, all united by a taste for human flesh and a preference for staying out of the sun. Their operation was disturbingly efficient. The clan targeted lone wanderers or small groups on remote roads, looting their goods and dragging the bodies back to their cave for, let's call it, processing. Imagine a medieval larder stocked not with grain or salted pork, but with human remains, bones piled high, flesh preserved like grim provisions. The Newgate Calendar describes a cave littered with relics of their victims, a macabre testament to their isolationist lifestyle. For years, they evaded detection, as missing travelers were blamed on wolves, bandits, or the era's vague catch-all, witches. The jig was up when a wounded survivor escaped and alerted the authorities. A search party, possibly led by soldiers under King James VI's command, stormed the cave and uncovered a scene straight out of a nightmare. Barrels of preserved flesh, scattered bones, and enough grisly evidence to haunt even the hardest medieval sheriff.
The Beans were dragged to Edinburgh,
where justice was swift and brutal. The men were dismembered alive, the women and children executed soon after. No trials, just the raw efficiency of 15th century retribution. Modern historians, like Scottish folklore expert Dr. Louise Yeoman, argue the story may be exaggerated or entirely fabricated, a cautionary tale spun to demonize lawless clans or scared travelers into sticking to main roads. Evidence is scarce. No contemporary court records confirm the bean's existence, yet the legend persists, fueled by our fascination with families who choose cannibalism over a day job. True or not, Sawney Bean reminds us that the real terrors of the Middle Ages weren't always in haunted castles. Sometimes they lurked in caves, thriving in the shadows of society's fringes. If the Middle Ages sound chaotic, imagine tossing organized crime into the mix. Not the polished kind with secret handshakes and velvet cloaks, but gritty networks run by people who smelled of sweat and wielded daggers forged from plowshares. Enter the Thieves' Guilds, the medieval equivalent of a trade union for those who preferred larceny to labor.
In bustling cities like London, Paris, and Venice, crime wasn't just a side hustle. It was a structured profession. Just as blacksmiths or weavers had guilds to regulate their craft, thieves formed clandestine networks to hone their skills and protect their own. Historical records, like those from 14th century Parisian court rolls, reveal organized bands of pickpockets and burglars operating with surprising sophistication. They had hierarchies, training programs, and even codes of conduct. Think of it as a medieval internship for sticky fingers. In Paris, these groups were dubbed coquillards, a term possibly derived from their use of pilgrim-like disguises to blend into crowds. New recruits underwent rigorous initiation, swearing oaths of loyalty and mastering subtle hand signals to coordinate heists. Some guilds, according to historian Bronislaw Geremek's studies, even trained members on mock targets, purses dangling from wooden dummies, before sending them into markets to lift real coin. These weren't just petty thieves, they were professionals who turned chaos into a career, navigating sewers and back alleys with the precision of a city planner. Their existence highlights a grim truth. In the Middle Ages, crime wasn't just tolerated, it was an art form, complete with its own shadowy apprenticeships.
In England, these shadowy thieves' guilds operated out of grim urban corners like Southwark, a London slum so rough even the stray dogs traveled in packs for safety. Medieval law enforcement was less a system and more a suggestion. Constables were often volunteers, bribable, or dozing off on the job. Prisons were so filthy that some thieves timed their crimes for winter, when a damp cell offered more warmth than the streets. Historical records, like those from 13th century London's court rolls, reveal authorities sometimes turned a blind eye, striking deals to pocket a cut of stolen goods in exchange for protection. Yes, medieval extortion rackets were as real as the mud on the cobblestones. But don't romanticize the guilds as rebels with a cause. This was a cutthroat business. Break the code, and you might lose a hand. A grim irony for a profession built on nimble fingers. Betray your crew, and you'd vanish quicker than a merchant's coin in a crowded market. Yet, in a society obsessed with rank and privilege, these guilds gave outcasts a twisted sense of purpose. Thievery wasn't just crime, it was a craft,
survival elevated to an art form.
So, if you ever find yourself wandering the Middle Ages, clutch your purse tightly. And if someone brushes past you twice, you've just made a generous donation to a centuries-old underground economy. As the Middle Ages gave way to the 18th century, the world was still gritty enough to feel like it hadn't fully left the medieval muck behind. Enter Dick Turpin, England's most infamous highwayman, whose legend outran his horse by a mile. Born around 1705 in Essex to a butcher's family, Turpin could have settled into a respectable life carving meat. Instead, he chose to carve out a career in crime, starting with cattle rustling, then horse theft, before realizing that holding up travelers was far more direct. By the 1730s, he was a full-fledged highwayman, the 18th century equivalent of a street robber, but with a flair for theatrics and better boots. The roads around London teemed with bandits, each dreaming of infamy, but Turpin mastered the art of self-promotion. Dressed sharply and armed with a silver tongue, he robbed with such charm that victims, per contemporary broadsheets like The Gentleman's Magazine, described him as oddly courteous, more polite than the local taxman at least.
Newspapers and pamphlets spun him into a folk hero, the gentleman bandit, with tales of daring escapes. The most famous? A supposed 200-mile ride from London to York in a single night on his trusty steed, Black Bess. It's a thrilling yarn, but pure fiction. Historian James Sharp notes the story was grafted onto Turpin from another criminal's legend. The real Turpin wasn't above violence, often turning brutal when cornered. After a botched robbery, where he shot a man who recognized him, he fled north, living under the alias John Palmer. His mistake? Writing a letter to his brother and skimping on postage. The postmaster, spotting his distinctive scrawl, turned him in. Arrested in 1739, Turpin faced the gallows in York before a rowdy crowd. Ever the performer, he bowed theatrically before the noose tightened, cementing his myth. The real Turpin was no dashing rogue, just a thief with a knack for publicity. His legend, polished by centuries of ballads and bad history, proves storytelling can outshine even the grimiest truth. If the idea of a holy warrior sounds like a paradox, meet Fra Moriale, a monk who turned piety into a side gig and warfare into his main hustle. Born around 1310 in Provence as Jean de Montreal, he joined the Knights Hospitaller, a religious order sworn to care for the sick, guard pilgrims, and occasionally wage holy war. Vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience came with the gig, but Moriale treated them like loose guidelines. By the 1340s, he'd traded the monastery for the battlefield, reinventing himself as a condottiero, a mercenary captain in Italy's chaotic patchwork of city-states. The 13th century was a smorgasbord of conflict, with Italian states like Florence and Milan hiring private armies to settle scores. Moriale saw opportunity where others saw chaos, selling his sword to the highest bidder. Chronicles like those of Matteo Villani describe him leading the Great Company, a ruthless band of mercenaries who plundered with the precision of a tax collector and the brutality of a Viking raid. For Moriale, salvation could wait. Profit was the real crusade.
Italy in the 14th century was a chaotic chessboard, with city-states, popes, and minor lords squabbling over power,
prestige, and the most ostentatious flags. Fra Moriale thrived in this mess, commanding the Great Company, a mercenary army so formidable it could topple small nations. According to chronicler Matteo Villani, this wasn't just a band of hired swords, it was a disciplined war machine that fought for the highest bidder, and when coin was scarce, they plundered for fun. Villages were ransacked, cities held hostage, and neutrality treated like a bad cold, something to be eradicated. In a bold move that stunned even the jaded Italians, Mordiale's forces looted the Papal States, a stunt that didn't exactly secure him a halo. His wealth grew obscene, funding lavish castles, gilded trinkets, and, as Villani snarkily noted, a bed more suited to a prince than a monk. His troops revered his cunning, civilians dreaded his shadow, and nobles grudgingly respected his knack for sending precise invoices. But Mordiale's belief that fortune was divine endorsement was his undoing.
By 1354, his relentless greed had turned allies into enemies, including Pope Clement VI, who wasn't fond of being upstaged. Captured in Rome, Moriale faced a Senate that, for once, moved faster than his bribes. He was executed, his body tossed into the streets, where locals gleefully stripped it bare, a poetic end for a man who lived by plunder. Moriale's tale, as recorded in Villani's Chronica, shows that you can leave the monastery behind, but swapping holy vows for unholy profits rarely ends in salvation. He lived loudly, died messily, and proved that even monks could go bankrupt in more ways than one. In 15th century France, long before organized crime meant slick suits and secret handshakes, the Coquillards ran a criminal network so slick it could have taught a masterclass in medieval mischief. Based in Dijon, Burgundy, a city where wine flowed as freely as schemes, the Coquillards were no mere pickpockets. They were con artists, forgers, and chameleons who could talk their way into a noble's trust and out with their silver.
The name Coquillards, derived from the French coquille, shell, nodded to the scallop shells worn by pilgrims returning from Santiago de Compostela. Dressed as devout travelers, they'd spin tales of holy journeys while lifting anything not nailed down. Historian Bronislaw Geremek describes them as a medieval proto-mafia, complete with their own coded slang, or argot, that turned purses into fish, knives into stars, and arrests into a divine misunderstanding. This wasn't just talk, it was a secret language designed to baffle outsiders and bond accomplices. Their scams were as varied as they were bold. They peddled fake relics, think saintly toenails or splinters of the true cross, to a relic-obsessed public, forged royal charters for profit, and ran distraction cons, where one thief played the loud drunk while another cleaned out the crowd. Court records from Dijon's 1455 trials reveal their audacity, noting forged seals that fooled even royal officials. But their success drew attention, and the Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Good, launched a crackdown. The trials were a spectacle. Some Coquillards argued their case in polished Latin, outshining the prosecutors. A few faced the gallows, others slipped away, and the rest rebranded, proving crime never dies, it just gets a new logo. The Coquillards, as Geremek notes, laid the groundwork for every grift that followed. pioneers of the eternal hustle to get rich without clocking in. If the Mediterranean boasted pirates with flair and poetry, the Baltic Sea churned out the opposite: frost-bitten marauders who reeked of salt and desperation. Enter the Victual Brothers, or Vitalienbrüder, a name that sounds like a medieval grocery delivery service, but was anything but. Formed in the 1390s, these Hanseatic pirates started with noble intentions, another warning sign in history's playbook. Initially hired to supply the besieged city of Stockholm during a Nordic power struggle, they were meant to be privateers, not outlaws. Chronicles like the Chronicon Danier describe them as a ragtag fleet ensuring food reached allies. But when the paychecks dried up, so did their morals. Renaming themselves after their original mission to deliver victuals, food, they turned to piracy, raiding merchant ships and coastal towns with a ferocity that made Snack Squad a terrifying misnomer.
By the late 14th century, the Victual Brothers had been hired by the Duke of Mecklenburg to ferry supplies to a besieged Stockholm, locked in a power struggle with Danish forces. They delivered the goods, pocketed their pay, and then, like mercenaries everywhere, decided that piracy offered better hours and fewer morals. Abandoning their delivery gigs, they turned the Baltic Sea into their personal plunder zone, raiding merchant ships, abducting crews, and extorting coastal towns. The Hanseatic League, a powerful coalition of northern European trade cities that operated like a medieval megacorporation, tried to rein them in, but the brothers were too slippery. Their motto, as recorded in chronicles like the Detmer Chronic, was "God's friends, the world's enemies," a tagline fit for a pirate flag or a bold social media profile. Their raids didn't just steal cargo, they choked trade routes, sent grain prices soaring, and forced cities to pay protection fees to avoid being sacked. Imagine being shaken down by sailors who couldn't pronounce ransom correctly. Their headquarters on the island of Gotland became a pirate utopia, a lawless hub of taverns, black markets, and fish so rank it could have been weaponized. By the early 1400s, the Victual Brothers were chaos incarnate, looting one day and fencing stolen goods to corrupt clergy the next. Even the Teutonic Knights, those armor-clad holy warriors, took a swing at them, only to learn that zealots in chainmail were no match for axe-wielding sailors half-drunk on stolen ale. The Hanseatic League finally had enough, uniting its fleets for a series of naval battles that crushed the pirates by 1401. Captured brothers faced public executions, not out of righteous fury, but because merchants were fed up with skyrocketing insurance costs. Yet their legend as the Baltic's sea wolves lived on, per sources like the Chronicon Danier. Ruthless, clever, and occasionally loyal if the coin was good, they taught empires a timeless lesson. Hire pirates to deliver your goods, and soon they'll be feasting on your wealth. If medieval Germany had a screaming service, Peter Nyers would star in a chilling docuseries titled Satanic Bandit, the bloodiest resume in Europe. Born around the mid-16th century, Nyers started as a roving thief, dabbling in highway robbery and the occasional knife work, standard fare for a career criminal.
But the bandit scene was crowded, so Nyers, ever the innovator, carved out a niche that made petty theft look quaint: serial murder with a satanic twist. Pamphlets from the time, like those preserved in the Furger newsletters, claimed he killed over 500 people, including pregnant women whose unborn children were allegedly used in occult rituals. That number is likely inflated, Logistically, he'd need a medieval spreadsheet to track such carnage. But the terror he spread was undeniable. Locals whispered he carried a bag stuffed with grim relics, human fat candles, preserved hearts, and possibly some very questionable snacks. Nyers leaned into the era's paranoia, with rumors, possibly spread by himself, claiming he could shapeshift into wolves or ravens to dodge capture. In a world where, per historian Johannes Dillinger, people eyed toads with suspicion, this was a brilliant PR move. He built a network of allies, innkeepers, beggars, fellow outlaws, bribed with stolen loot, making him a folk anti-hero to some peasants who admired his defiance of church and state.
But Nyers' luck ran dry in 1577 when he was nabbed, only to escape, humiliating authorities so thoroughly they executed his accomplices with extra zeal. He resurfaced years later near Neumarkt, betrayed by an innkeeper who spotted his creepy bag of souvenirs. Arrested mid-meal in 1581, Nyers faced a gruesome end, 2 days of torture, broken on the wheel and dismembered, as detailed in contemporary execution records. The crowd roared, partly for justice, partly because a public execution was 16th century Europe's hottest ticket. Whether a demonic mastermind or just a brutal thug, Nyers remains a stain on history's ledger, a man so vile it took 2 religions and a toolbox of torture to erase him. Every now and then, the Middle Ages churned out someone who looked at the endless grind of feudal taxes, starvation, and mud-soaked misery and decided enough is enough. Robert of Redsdale was one such firebrand, an English rebel who proved that if the system hands you oppression, you can at least torch it on your way out.
In the summer of 1469, England was knee-deep in the Wars of the Roses, a decades-long aristocratic brawl over who got to wear the crown and tank the economy next. While nobles clashed in gilded armor, peasants were squeezed dry by taxes, famine, and lords who saw them as little more than walking wallets. Enter Robert, a figure so murky that historians can't pin him down. Was he a disillusioned knight, a battle-hardened soldier, or just, as one chronicler put it in the Paston Letters, a man with a grudge and too many followers? Whatever his roots, Robert ignited a spark, rallying thousands of peasants, farmers, and lesser gentry with the promise not of grand ideals like freedom, but of something far more visceral: payback against those who jacked up the price of grain. The Redsdale Rebellion roared through northern England like wildfire. Castles were stormed, manors gutted, and tax collectors faced the kind of feedback that involved pitchforks and public humiliation. Robert's ragtag army marched south, chanting about reform, though, per historian Charles Ross, many likely just wanted a decent meal and a glimpse of London before the inevitable crackdown.
Early victories sent shockwaves. Local lords fled, and the royal court in Westminster scrambled. But medieval rebellions, like overcooked stew, rarely lasted. King Edward IV's professional army, unimpressed by peasant fervor, crushed the uprising in days at the Battle of Edgecote Moor. Survivors were strung up, villages razed, and history resumed its usual script: penned by those who never touched a plow. Robert's fate is a mystery. Executed, murdered, or perhaps faded into the moors like a ghost born of mud. His name lingered as a cautionary tale for kings. Push the common folk too far, and even a pitchfork becomes a sword. Robert didn't topple the throne, but he proved that, even in a world of divine right hierarchies, rebellion could leave a bruise. Long before shadowy spies or cinematic crime lords, there were the assassins of Alamut, a group so enigmatic and lethal that their name became synonymous with murder itself. In 11th century Persia, a charismatic and uncompromising scholar named Hassani Sabah decided the Islamic world needed a shake-up. Less chaos, more order, and far fewer rivals. Founding a splinter sect of Ismaili Shi'ism, he captured the mountain fortress of Alamut in 1090, a near-impregnable stronghold in northern Iran's Alborz Mountains, described by chronicler Atta Malik Juvaini as a nest of eagles. From this perch, Hassan built a secret society that redefined fear. Their enemies dubbed them Hashashin, a slur implying they were drug-fueled killers, high on hashish, an exaggeration, per historian Bernard Lewis, likely spread to discredit them. In truth, the assassins were disciplined operatives, educated, methodical, and eerily patient. Their craft was political assassination, executed with surgical precision that could shift the tide of wars. Disguised as scribes, merchants, or even overly enthusiastic stable hands, they infiltrated courts across the Middle East. A single, well-timed dagger could topple a dynasty or halt an army, often struck in public for maximum impact. Kings, viziers, and even crusader lords like Conrad of Montferrat learned to triple-check their wine and lock their doors, though no lock could stop a bribed guard.
The assassins didn't need vast armies. As Marco Polo's exaggerated accounts suggest, their reputation was their weapon, sowing paranoia that did half their work. Even Saladin, the legendary conqueror of Jerusalem, narrowly escaped their blades twice, prompting him to beef up his security, per the Siyar al-Muluk. Their reign ended in 1256, when the Mongols, unimpressed by mystique, razed Alamut to rubble. Yet the assassin's legacy endures, a chilling reminder that in a world of swords and shields, a whisper and a knife could rewrite history. The assassins of Alamut didn't need sprawling empires or fortified cities to leave their mark. Their fortress fell to the Mongols in 1256, yet their legend outlived stone and steel. The term assassin, carried west by crusaders, wormed its way into every language, becoming shorthand for a killer with purpose. As historian Bernard Lewis notes, their true power wasn't in numbers, but in precision. A single blade could shift the fate of kingdoms. Long after Alamut's ruins crumbled, their legacy whispered a timeless truth. In the game of power, a well-aimed dagger speaks louder than armies. The assassins proved that sometimes the smallest weapon leaves the deepest scar.
In medieval London, if you made it to dusk with your coins still jingling, you deserved a medal for surviving the city's favorite pastime, getting fleeced. Long before banks perfected the art of creative accounting, London's cut purses turned pickpocketing into a high-stakes craft. The city's narrow, chaotic streets, teeming with merchants, pilgrims, stray dogs, and the occasional runaway pig, were a thief's paradise. While priests preached about eternal damnation, cut purses quietly liberated their alms. Violence was for amateurs. These thieves were virtuosos. A flick of a razor-sharp blade could sever a purse's strings in a heartbeat, the prize vanishing into the crowd before the victim noticed. Some worked solo, but the best operated in pairs, one to jostle you in the market, another to offer a heartfelt apology while lifting your week's wages. Chronicles like the London Guildhall records describe their finesse, a steady hand, a cool head, and a conscience as light as the purses they stole. Aspiring cut purses trained like any tradesperson, apprenticed to masters who taught them to practice on dummies or, more likely, passed out drunks.
Women were just as skilled, often posing as flower girls or pious penitents. One 15th century thief, dubbed Quick Nan in court records, reportedly worked church services, targeting noble women lost in prayer. Authorities were complicit, with sheriffs and guards skimming profits from the underworld, per historian Barbara Honewalt's studies. Executions were common, but gallows days doubled as networking fairs for thieves, who'd inherit their mentors' clients post-hanging. The term cut purse eventually became a slur for anyone with flexible morals, thieves, nobles, or the occasional shady cleric. London's modern streets may lack dangling pouches, but the cut purse's spirit lingers in every slick scam or sly hustle, reminding us that some trades never go out of style. Forget the vampire cliches of brooding castles and blood-sipping warlords. Vlad the Impaler's reality was far grimmer and more methodical. Born in 1431 in Transylvania, Vlad III of Wallachia ruled a precarious principality caught between the Ottoman Empire and Hungary, both of which treated his land like a geopolitical punching bag. His father, Vlad II Dracul, was part of the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric club that sounded prestigious, but was mostly a pact for armed nobles with grudges.
Vlad inherited the nickname Dracula, son of the dragon, and embraced it with a zeal that bordered on obsession. As a teenager, he was a hostage of the Ottomans, learning their tactics, politics, and a deep-seated loathing for his captors, per historian Radu Florescu. When he seized Wallachia's throne in 1456, he tackled crime with a solution as simple as it was brutal: make the punishment worse than the offense. Vlad's signature move was impalement, a gruesome execution where a stake was driven through the body, leaving victims to linger in agony. Thieves, liars, even diplomats who crossed him faced this fate. One tale, recorded by chronicler Leonikos Chalkondylis, claims Vlad nailed the hats of disrespectful envoys to their heads, settling diplomatic disputes with permanent clarity. When the Ottomans invaded in 1462, Vlad upped the ante, reportedly impaling 20,000 prisoners in a grotesque Forest of the Impaled outside Târgoviste, a psychological gambit to terrify his enemies. While the number may be exaggerated, German woodcuts from the time spread his infamy, painting him as a tyrant who dined amid his victims. Vlad didn't sip blood, he spilled it with bureaucratic precision, proving that in a world of chaos, terror could be a chillingly effective policy.
When Vlad the Impaler waged his brutal campaign, the Ottomans reconsidered their invasion plans, because who wouldn't balk at a forest of 20,000 impaled corpses? To his relation subjects, Vlad was a paradox, a ruthless protector who crushed crime through sheer terror. Merchants could leave gold in the streets untouched, though the stench of his decorations lingered per German pamphlets like the Draculae Waida. Fear worked wonders. Half the population was either too scared to steal or skewered as a warning. Betrayed by allies, Vlad was captured by the Hungarians in 1462, later released, and killed in battle around 1476. His head, preserved in honey, was sent to the Ottoman Sultan as a grisly trophy, a nod to medieval flair for presentation per historian Matej Kazaku. Centuries later, Bram Stoker spun him into Count Dracula, trading steaks for fangs. But the real Vlad wasn't a supernatural fiend. He was a bureaucrat of brutality, enforcing order so ruthlessly that hell itself seemed like a team-building retreat. His legacy proves that in a lawless age, terror could be the ultimate policy.
Now, let's pivot to a figure who wasn't a medieval outlaw, but whose shadow looms just as large: Alexander the Great, whose final days in Babylon, June 323 BCE, read like a thriller scripted by fate. Picture a sweltering palace, thick with the aroma of roasted lamb, incense, and unchecked ambition. At 32, Alexander, conqueror of Persia, India, and half the known world, sits at a grand marble table, surrounded by generals whose forced laughter barely masks their weariness. The banquet is meant to toast his next conquest, a planned invasion of Arabia, but it feels like a dare to the gods, a final flex from a man who's already reshaped the map. Scars crisscross his body like battle-worn tapestries, his voice hoarse from endless campaigns, his eyes red from sleepless nights and too much wine. Yet he's still Alexander, magnetic and unyielding, commanding the room with a raised cup. He downs the wine, diluted with water and honey, perhaps laced with something darker. A grimace flickers across his face, quickly buried under a laugh.
The king who stormed Persepolis now falters, unsteady as he rises. Whispers ripple among his inner circle, recorded in sources like Arrian's Anabasis Alexandri. Was it a sudden pain, a burning in his gut, or had a fever crept in days earlier, contracted while inspecting Babylon's marshy canals? Suspicion points to Cassander, son of Antipater, whose family had clashed with Alexander's divine pretensions. Others, humiliated by his relentless ambition, might have slipped poison into his cup, per theories in Plutarch's Lives. As music swells and torches cast golden shadows, the conqueror shivers, the first sign of a battle no sword could win. The night hums with tension, a prelude to an empire's unraveling. By morning, Babylon buzzes with unease. Servants murmur, the king is unwell.
At first, it's dismissed. Alexander has survived arrows, infections, and exhaustion that would have felled lesser men. But he wakes drenched in sweat, trembling as if his empire's weight is crushing him from within. Wine burns his throat. He refuses it, muttering incoherently.
His generals, Ptolemy, Perdiccas, Nearchus, visit, expecting their indomitable leader, only to find him pale, his voice a whisper. Yet, half delirious, he rambles about troop movements and naval plans, as if death is just another fortress to storm, per Diodorus Siculus. The fever climbs, chaining him to his bed. Corridors hum with panicked whispers. Was it malaria from the Euphrates marshes? Typhoid from tainted water? Or poison slipped by a traitor's hand? By day's end, the man who shouted orders across battlefields struggles to speak, his empire teetering as his breath grows ragged. Babylon, city of conquest, becomes the stage for a fight Alexander can't win, one that began with a single fateful sip. The royal physicians hover like nervous shadows, pressing damp cloths to Alexander's burning forehead, their hands trembling as they try remedies, herbal brews, prayers, even bloodletting that feel more like rituals than cures. None dare voice the truth. They're powerless. "I'll be fine," Alexander croaks, his voice defiant but frail, as if willpower alone could conquer the unseen enemy ravaging him. He calls for his armor, demands to rally his troops, but can't even raise his head from the pillow.
By the 5th day, whispers of "the king is dying" ripple through Babylon's streets, where soldiers grip their spears tighter and servants mutter charms against malevolent spirits. Inside the palace, Alexander, the man who tamed empires, lies consumed by fever, murmuring plans for an Arabian campaign as his strength ebbs. The conqueror who laughed at armies now faces a foe no spear can touch, no strategy can outmaneuver, per Arrian's Anabasis Alexandri. Babylon, once a stage for his triumphs, feels like a crypt closing in. By the 7th day, the palace is a mausoleum of hushed voices and heavy silences. Servants glide through marble halls like ghosts, guards exchange uneasy glances, and courtiers' forced smiles hide dread. Alexander's fever burns hotter, his skin slick with sweat, his breaths shallow gasps of defiance. The physicians, out of ideas and courage, retreat behind vague promises. In the antechamber, generals Ptolemy, Seleucus, Perdiccas feign discussions of military plans, but their eyes betray the real battle. Who claims the empire when its heart stops beating? Ambition simmers beneath their grief, as noted in Diodorus Siculus's accounts.
No one dares speak it, but the question hangs like smoke. Who inherits a world forged by one man's will? Babylon pulses with treachery, every general secretly weighing their chance at the throne, or at least a slice of the empire. Theories of poison, not plague, gain traction. Cassander, whose father Antipater clashed with Alexander's divine ambitions, is a frequent suspect, as is Iolaus, his cupbearer, per Plutarch's Lives.
Some even point to Aristotle, Alexander's old tutor, rumored to have concocted a lethal brew out of spite. A stretch, but paranoia thrives in Babylon's heat. Outside, Macedonian veterans who followed their king from Greece to India gather at the palace gates, praying for the man they believed invincible. Their loyalty is unwavering, but doubt creeps in. He's mortal, after all. That night, torches flicker low, casting jagged shadows across marble floors. The drip of water in Alexander's chamber marks time like a funeral drum. The silence grows oppressive, as if the gods themselves are waiting for the inevitable. By the 9th day, Alexander lies still, a shadow of the Titan who stormed Persepolis.
His empire, stretching from Macedonia to the Indus, teeters on the edge of chaos. The generals' daily gatherings are less about hope and more about strategy, not for war, but for succession. Perdiccas, ever loyal, claims to carry Alexander's final orders, but his gaze hints at ambition. Ptolemy, smooth and diplomatic, hides his plans behind a calm facade. Seleucus, watchful and silent, sizes up his rivals per Justin's epitome. Alexander has no clear heir. His wife Roxana carries a child, possibly a son, but an unborn prince can't rule. Whispers of Heracles, his illegitimate son, surface, but the idea of splitting the empire feels like sacrilege, though tempting, to men hungry for power. Outside, the army grows restless, refusing orders from anyone but their king. Babylon's courtyards hum with tension, soldiers clashing with courtiers, all sensing the fault lines cracking beneath an empire too vast to survive its creator. The man who never lost a battle lies defeated, his final fight lost to a silent, invisible foe. The Macedonian veterans, hardened by years of conquest from Greece to India, grow restless outside Babylon's palace, muttering that they'll choose their own leaders if Alexander falls.
The threat sends a chill through the generals, who feel the empire slipping like sand through their fingers. Inside, the royal chamber suffocates under thick incense and stale air. Physicians, desperate to seem useful, suggest rituals to appease the gods, while priests chant softly, fanning pungent smoke. Alexander, drifting in and out of consciousness, murmurs fragments of commands, perhaps to phantom armies, perhaps to the shadows closing in. His eyes, once sharp enough to rally thousands, flicker open, glassy but defiant, as if death is just another foe to outwit. The generals, gathered at his bedside, are torn between devotion and dread. They pray for his recovery, yet fear what he'll do if he rises and discovers their whispered schemes. Every labored breath, every faint cough feels like a prophecy, per Arian's Anabasis Alexandri. In that dim chamber, the world's mightiest men silently brace for a future without their king. By the 8th day, the palace gates buckle under the weight of loyalty. Thousands of soldiers, scarred, sunburned, and fiercely devoted, demand to see Alexander, their voices rising like a storm.
Rumors swirl. Some claim he's rallying. Others whisper he's already gone. His death concealed so the generals can carve up the empire. The air inside grows heavy with the stench of burning oils and decay,
barely masked by perfume. Guards at Alexander's door stand rigid, unsure if they are protecting a king or a corpse. In the antechamber, the general's hushed arguments spill through marble walls. Ptolemy calls for restraint, his voice calm but strained. Perdiccas warns of riots if the army isn't shown proof of life, per Diodorus Siculus. Reluctantly, they open the gates. The soldiers file in, barefoot and weaponless, not as conquerors but as pilgrims. The line snakes through the courtyard, a tide of grief stretching into the night. In the royal chamber, Alexander lies pale against silk linens, his breath shallow. Yet as each soldier kneels, something extraordinary happens. His eyes crack open, meeting theirs with a spark of recognition. His hand twitches upward, a trembling gesture, half salute, half defiance. A faint smile flickers, enough to reignite their faith.
Soldiers collapse to their knees, some sobbing, whispering Alexander like a sacred vow, convinced their god-king is merely resting, per Plutarch's Lives. To them he's still invincible, but the generals, watching from the shadows, see the truth. The man who bound an empire with his will can barely move. His final gesture, a fleeting act of command, drains him. As the last soldier exits, the army chants his name into the Babylonian night, unaware they've witnessed his farewell. Silence reclaims the palace, heavy with the weight of an ending. By the 10th day, Babylon swelters under a merciless sun, the heat mirroring the fever consuming its king. Alexander lies still, his chest barely rising, a hollow shell of the Titan who roared orders over clashing armies. His eyes, once blazing with ambition, are half shut, pupils dim. His lips twitch, forming soundless words, perhaps plans for Arabia, perhaps pleas to gods he once claimed to rival. Physicians drip water and honey onto his tongue, but he no longer responds, per Justin's epitome. The generals, Ptolemy, Perdiccas, Seleucus, hover like vultures cloaked in mourning, their prayers to Apollo or Asclepius ringing hollow.
Ptolemy stands resolute, masking his plans. Perdiccas paces, his agitation betraying his loyalty. Seleucus, silent and calculating, already maps the empire's fragments in his mind. The room reeks of incense, sweat, and betrayal. No one speaks of succession, but the question pulses. Who rules when the man who conquered the world is gone? Roxana's unborn child offers no answers, and whispers of Heracles, Alexander's illegitimate son, stir only division. Outside, the army's chants grow desperate, their loyalty a ticking bomb in a city on the edge of chaos. At last, the oppressive silence shatters. Alexander, his voice a fragile whisper, calls for his soldiers. The command, faint as it is, electrifies the palace. Veterans who marched with him from Macedon to the Indus flood the courtyard, their faces etched with hope and dread. One by one, they enter the royal chamber, some kissing his limp hand, others bowing in silent reverence. Alexander gestures weakly toward his generals, a gesture too vague to decipher. A call for unity or a final order lost to delirium? A soldier leans close, daring to ask, "Who will lead us?" His eyes, clouded with fever, drift. His breath slows. "To the strongest," he murmurs, the words barely audible, "per Arians Anabasis Alexandri." Then the hand that reshaped empires falls still. The torches seem to dim, as if the gods themselves sigh. Outside, the soldiers' chants falter, sensing the truth before it's spoken. For a moment, Babylon holds its breath, the weight of a world-changing death too vast for one room to contain. When the news breaks, it doesn't spread, it detonates. Babylon erupts in anguish. Soldiers rip their tunics, women wail from rooftops, and priests scramble to temples offering futile sacrifices. Per Diodorus Siculus, the man who was a god to his followers, the undefeated conqueror, is gone. His empire, a fragile mosaic of cultures held together by his charisma, trembles like a cracked monument. Inside the palace, grief gives way to chaos. Generals whisper, then shout over who speaks for Alexander now. Perdiccas, clutching his role as commander, insists on formal rites, while Ptolemy, ever cunning, eyes the treasury, fearing looters will exploit the vacuum. Some propose returning Alexander's body to Macedon, but even that sparks bitter disputes, per Justin's epitome.
The palace, once a seat of triumph, becomes a council of vultures draped in mourning. Outside, thousands of soldiers kneel in the dust, refusing to accept their king's death. "He's Alexander. He can't die," one veteran mutters, as if faith could rewrite fate. They demand to see him, to touch the man they followed through deserts and blood. The gates creak open, and a somber procession begins. Torches light the courtyard as soldiers file past a raised bier, where Alexander lies draped in royal silk, his bronze cuirass gleaming beside him, a relic of victories like Gaugamela. The air carries the sharp scent of myrrh and honey, early embalming efforts to preserve a god-king, per Plutarch's Lives. Veterans collapse, pounding the stone floor. Others chant his name as if repetition could summon him back. Even the royal elephants, penned nearby, trumpet mournfully, sensing the city's sorrow. Babylon's markets fall silent, taverns empty, every home glowing with lamplight as faces turn toward the palace. For 12 years, Alexander meant destiny. Now his name carries the weight of loss. No one, not even the conqueror of the world, outruns death.
Alexander's death doesn't end his wars, it merely shifts the battlefield. Within days, Babylon's marble halls turn into a chessboard of ambition. His body, preserved in honey and myrrh, becomes a sacred prize, a symbol of legitimacy for the Alexander romance. Whoever controls it holds a claim to rule. Perdiccas, as commander of the royal army, demands the corpse return to Macedon to rest beside Philip II. The others nod, their agreement as genuine as a serpent's smile. Ptolemy, stationed in Egypt, envisions a different fate. Alexander's body enshrined in his new capital, Alexandria, a divine anchor for his own power. A golden funeral carriage is crafted, a rolling temple adorned with statues, columns, and a gilded canopy that blazes under the desert sun, described in Diodorus Siculus. It's meant for Macedon, but the journey will take months, and every general knows a slow-moving relic is ripe for hijacking. As Alexander's golden funeral carriage rolls out of Babylon, thousands of soldiers march beside it, their tears mingling with silence. But behind the procession, the empire they bled for frays like a worn tapestry. Secret letters fly between camps, rival factions arm themselves, and assassins sharpen blades, ready to turn a funeral into a coronation.
Ptolemy moves first, his forces ambushing the cortege in Syria per Diodorus Siculus. The outnumbered guards yield without a fight, and Alexander's body is diverted not to Macedon's rocky hills, but to Egypt's sun-scorched sands. When word reaches Babylon, fury mixes with weary acceptance. Some cry theft, others call it fate, noting Alexander's reverence for Egypt, where he was proclaimed son of Zeus Ammon per Arrian's Anabasis Alexandri. For Ptolemy, it's no divine act, it's a calculated power grab. The age of Alexander ends not in solemn mourning, but in a ruthless scramble for his legacy, his corpse a spark igniting war. In the months following, Alexander's empire shatters like a vase flung from a cliff. His generals, once united by his magnetic will, turn scavengers, carving his world into fiefdoms. They style themselves Diadochi, successors, but they're more like wolves at a feast, per Justin's epitome. Perdiccas claims regency for Roxana's unborn son, Alexander IV, but his authority is a fiction none respect.
Ptolemy fortifies Egypt, enshrining Alexander's body as a sacred relic. Antigonus seizes Asia Minor, Seleucus claims Babylon, and Cassander grips Greece. The empire, forged by one man's vision, splinters into rival kingdoms dripping with betrayal. Alexander's corpse, first housed in Memphis, is later moved to a grand marble tomb in Alexandria, per Pausanias. Pilgrims flock to worship the man who dared to be a god, but the tomb's location fades from history, as if Alexander refused to be tethered even in death. Myths multiply. Some say he ascended to the heavens, others that his body defied decay, a sign of divine favor, per the Alexander romance. To Greeks, he's Achilles reborn. To Persians, a scourge. To history, an enigma whose shadow fuels empires and dreams. Centuries later, in 48 BCE, Egypt teeters on the edge of chaos, not from foreign swords, but from a family feud sharper than any blade. Cleopatra VII, last of the Ptolemaic dynasty, is ousted from Alexandria by her younger brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIII, backed by a court of scheming eunuchs and advisors whispering venom, per Plutarch's Life of Caesar.
Exiled to the desert, Cleopatra trades palace marble for a tent under a star-strewn sky, her loyalists dwindling, but her ambition undimmed. Far to the west, Julius Caesar lands in Alexandria, not as a suitor, but as a Roman enforcer, hunting Pompey, his rival turned fugitive. Pompey sought refuge in Egypt, but Ptolemy's courtiers, eager to curry favor, greet Caesar with a grotesque offering, Pompey's severed head, presented like a diplomatic gift per Appian's civil wars. Caesar, a man who thrives on control, recoils at the barbarity, a boy king's clumsy attempt at politics. In this powder keg of intrigue, Cleopatra sees her chance, ready to turn exile into opportunity with a move as bold as it is legendary. Cleopatra knows that Egypt's throne isn't won with swords alone, but with audacious gambits. Smuggled into Caesar's chambers inside a rolled carpet, or perhaps a linen sack,
depending on whether you trust Plutarch or Cassius Dio. She emerges not as a fugitive, but as a queen reborn. At 21, travel-worn but electric with charisma, she faces Julius Caesar, conqueror of Gaul.
She speaks 7 languages. He wields the language of power. Their exchange is no plea for mercy, but a masterclass in persuasion, per Plutarch's Life of Caesar. Cleopatra casts herself as a ruler betrayed, her throne stolen by her brother's scheming court. Caesar, 52 and battle-weary, sees in her a mirror of his own relentless drive. By dawn, their alliance is sealed, not just in whispered strategies, but in silk sheets, a partnership that's as much political as it is personal. Cleopatra gains Rome's might. Caesar secures Egypt's wealth and grain, Rome's lifeline. What begins as calculations sparks into something electric, a union that will scandalize empires and reshape history. Caesar's arrival in Alexandria was meant to be a quick diplomatic stop, but Cleopatra's gambit turns it into a crucible. Declaring her the rightful queen ignites chaos, per Appian's civil wars. Ptolemy XIII's advisors, led by the cunning eunuch Pothinus and the general Achillas, see Caesar's decree as Roman meddling. To them, Cleopatra is no restored monarch, but a puppet of a foreign power. Alexandria, the Mediterranean's glittering hub, becomes a war zone.
Narrow streets ring with clashing swords, and smoke from burning ships chokes the harbor. Caesar, with only 4,000 men, is trapped in the royal quarter, facing Ptolemy's army and a city of 500,000 ready to revolt. Cleopatra stands firm beside him, no damsel, but a strategist, her knowledge of Egypt's politics and terrain guiding their defense. Caesar, ever the tactician, torches Ptolemy's fleet to secure an escape route, accidentally setting the great library ablaze, destroying countless scrolls, per Cassius Dio. The siege stretches on, food dwindles, and morale frays, but Cleopatra's counsel and presence keep Caesar's resolve ironclad. For months they endure relentless assaults by land and sea, the palace a fortress under siege. Cleopatra's wit matches Caesar's military genius, their bond forged in the din of catapults and the reek of burning pitch. Relief arrives when Roman reinforcements, led by Mithridates of Pergamum, smash through Ptolemy's lines, per Suetonius's Life of Julius Caesar. The boy king's forces collapse, and Ptolemy XIII drowns in the Nile, his golden armor dragging him under. A poetic end for a child undone by ambition and bad advisors.
As Alexandria's smoke clears, Cleopatra emerges not just as queen, but as the woman who outmaneuvered a civil war and captivated Rome's greatest general. Yet, Egypt's throne is a fragile prize under Rome's watchful gaze. To cement her rule, Cleopatra follows Ptolemaic tradition, marrying her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, a boy barely past puberty, a mere formality to appease custom, per Strabo's Geographica. The real power lies in her alliance with Caesar, who lingers in Alexandria, not as a guest, but as a partner, or perhaps a captive of her charm. Together, they transform the battered city into a stage of grandeur, their public displays of unity a calculated spectacle of Egypt and Rome entwined, gilded in gold and ambition. To Alexandrians,
Cleopatra was Isis incarnate, a divine queen radiating power and grace. To Julius Caesar, she was a revelation, a diplomat whose charm outshone even her beauty. Her intellect, fluent in 7 languages, could sway a room of battle-hardened generals or spar with philosophers, per Plutarch's Life of Caesar. Caesar, a veteran of Rome's cutthroat politics, found in her not just a lover, but a peer in ambition, a woman who played the game of power with equal ruthlessness.
Their alliance, born of strategy, soon blurred into passion, a dangerous alchemy that reshaped empires. Then came the bombshell. Cleopatra was pregnant. The news sent Alexandria into a frenzy and Rome into a panic. Caesar, already wed to Calpurnia, could not legally marry a foreign queen, per Roman law cited in Suetonius's Life of Julius Caesar. Yet Cleopatra, carrying their son, later named Caesarion, shone with triumph, her child a living bridge between Egypt and Rome, or perhaps a spark to ignite both. She fortified Egypt's economy, streamlined taxes, and restored neglected temples, casting herself as a goddess of renewal to her people, per Cassius Dio's Roman History. To Caesar, she was both an irresistible ally and a political liability, her love entwined with an empire's weight. In 47 BCE, Caesar prepared to leave Egypt, summoned back to Rome's ongoing civil war by his lieutenant Mark Antony. But he didn't depart alone. Cleopatra, now mother to Caesarion, joined him on a lavish cruise down the Nile, a spectacle that doubled as a power play, per Appian's civil wars.
Their royal barge, draped in purple sails and alive with flute melodies, was less a vessel and more a floating palace, its decks crowded with musicians and attendants. The journey through Egypt's ancient temples was a public performance. Caesar as Dionysus, Cleopatra as Isis, cementing their divine partnership. Yet Rome loomed large in Caesar's mind. He left reluctantly, vowing to summon her later, while Cleopatra, ever calculating, knew love alone wouldn't secure her throne or her son's future. She tied Egypt's fate to Rome's ambition, betting on Caesar's power to protect her own. When Cleopatra arrived in Rome in 46 BCE, she didn't just visit, she staged a spectacle that shook the Republic's foundations. Lodged in Caesar's villa across the Tiber, she was a foreign queen treated with unprecedented honors per Cicero's scathing letters. Draped in gold and Egyptian linen, she strode through Rome's streets, a living challenge to its austere traditions. The Romans gaped, torn between awe and outrage, calling her an Eastern sorceress who'd ensnared their general.
Caesar, undeterred, pursued his dream of reshaping Rome into a monarchy, ignoring whispers that Cleopatra had softened his resolve, per Suetonius. She moved carefully, charming senators and intellectuals while observing every shift in Rome's treacherous currents. Her presence was a calculated provocation, her son Caesarion a symbol of a fused future, or a threat to Rome's pride. Envy simmered in the Senate's marble halls, and behind the pomp, daggers gleamed. Cleopatra had won Caesar's heart, but Rome's was a battlefield where charm alone wouldn't suffice. Cleopatra's stay in Rome was less a diplomatic visit than a high-stakes performance, testing how far Caesar could bend the Republic before it broke. Adorned in jewels that sparkled under Rome's sun, she attended banquets with the poise of a deity and the cunning of a conqueror, per Cassius Dio. To Romans, she was an enigma, exotic, perilous, and magnetic. She navigated their world with precision, disarming critics with wit, while never forgetting she walked a razor's edge.
Caesar's affection was her shield, but it couldn't blunt the growing resentment of a Senate that saw her as a threat to their power and their traditions. Her every move, from public appearances to private councils, was a gambit in a city where loyalty was as fleeting as the Tiber's current, and betrayal was already sharpening its blade. Caesar's audacity knew no bounds when he placed a golden statue of Cleopatra in the temple of Venus Genetrix, the goddess he claimed as his ancestor, per Cassius Dio's Roman history. It was a brazen statement. Cleopatra wasn't just a guest, but a divine figure, elevated beside Rome's sacred lineage. To senators, it was an outrage, a foreign queen deified in their hallowed halls, proof that Caesar's ambition had outstripped Roman restraint. Whispers grew venomous. Cleopatra was pushing Caesar toward kingship, dreaming of an empire ruled from Alexandria, per Suetonius's Life of Julius Caesar. Truth or not, perception in Rome was a blade, and Cleopatra's presence sharpened it. Unfazed, Caesar pressed on, reshaping Rome with reforms, renaming a month July in his honor, and planning grand monuments.
Golden-haired boy whose existence screamed defiance of Roman law. Cleopatra played her part with precision, charming senators and dazzling intellectuals, all while studying Rome's crumbling republic per Plutarch's Life of Caesar. She knew love was a weapon, and alliances were forged in blood. As omens multiplied, strange skies, prophetic murmurs, Cleopatra's instincts, honed by years of court intrigue, sensed danger where Caesar saw only destiny. She urged caution, but he scoffed, unshaken by battles or betrayals, per Suetonius. By 44 BCE, Caesar stood as Dictator Perpetuo, ruler for life, a title that sounded like a throne to a republic that despised kings. His statues crowded the forum, his face adorned coins, each a slap to Roman tradition. Cleopatra, from her villa, watched the Senate's tense silences, sensing the storm brewing. A seer warned of the Ides of March. Calpurnia, Caesar's wife, dreamed of his blood. Cleopatra's priests read doom in the stars, per Cicero's accounts. Yet Caesar, quoting Shakespeare's later embellishment, laughed. Cowards die many times before their deaths. On March 15th,
he strode into the theater of Pompeii, irony thick as he sat beneath his rival's statue.
Surrounded by supposed allies, the first dagger struck, then dozens more. Seeing Brutus, his trusted protege among the assassins, Caesar faltered. Et tu, Brute, he whispered, per legend, collapsing in a pool of blood. Rome's Titan fell, a mortal after all. News of Caesar's death raced across the Tiber like a lightning bolt. Cleopatra, clutching Caesarion, barricaded herself in her villa, her mind already plotting her Appian's civil wars. Love and power had always been entwined. Now both bled. Rome erupted in chaos. The Senate, believing they'd saved the Republic, had instead unleashed a tempest. Crowds surged through the streets, howling for vengeance, while Caesar's loyalists, soldiers and citizens alike, chanted his name in the Forum per Plutarch. Cleopatra, no stranger to betrayal, knew her position was precarious. Caesarion, her link to Caesar's legacy, was both her strength and her vulnerability. Rome was no longer a stage for her charm, but a battlefield where allies could turn assassins overnight. She prepared to navigate this new war, her intellect sharper than any dagger, ready to wield Egypt's wealth and her own cunning to secure her throne and her son's future in a city now tearing itself apart.
As Rome burned with bonfires and guilt, Cleopatra knew her time in the city was over. Once a celebrated guest of its greatest man, she was now a scapegoat, blamed for Caesar's flirtation with monarchy. Whispers branded her a sorceress who'd lured him to his doom, the daggers meant for him carrying her name as well, per Cassius Dio's Roman history. Her Tiber villa became a gilded cage, abandoned by servants and shunned by officials. News swirled like smoke. Caesar's body was cremated in the Forum. His assassins had fled, and Mark Antony, his loyal general, had seized control of the legions, per Plutarch's Life of Antony. Cleopatra, ever calculating, saw Rome's chaos for what it was, a trap. With Egypt undefended and Caesarion, her son, a potential target, she acted swiftly. Under a moonless sky, she slipped away to Ostia, her ships gliding out before dawn, per Appian's civil wars. The voyage home was tense, each creak of the deck echoing memories of Caesar's laughter and Rome's screams. Caesarion, sleeping below, was her last tie to a fallen Titan, and a dangerous beacon for Rome's ambitions. As Alexandria's lighthouse gleamed on the horizon, Cleopatra vowed that Caesar's death would not end her reign. Through her son, their legacy would endure. Rome, meanwhile, tore itself apart in the void left by Caesar's murder. Senators scattered, armies shifted allegiances, and the Republic bled in its streets per Suetonius's Life of Julius Caesar. Out of this chaos rose Mark Antony, Caesar's charismatic lieutenant, whose fiery oration at the funeral turned public grief into rage.
per Plutarch. A man of raw passion and reckless ambition, Antony seized power, teetering between statesman and demagogue. Cleopatra, watching from Alexandria, studied him closely. She knew his reputation, a soldier who fought hard, loved harder, and drank to outrun his flaws. Unlike Caesar's calculated restraint, Antony thrived on instinct, a trait Cleopatra saw as both a weakness and an opportunity. As Rome's fragile order crumbled, Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, challenged Antony, forming an uneasy alliance, the Second Triumvirate, to prop up the dying republic while secretly plotting its end, per Appian. Egypt, with its wealth, ships, and grain, became their linchpin, and Cleopatra held the key.
In 41 BCE, Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus, accusing her of disloyalty during Rome's civil wars, per Plutarch's Life of Antony. A lesser ruler might have arrived in fear. Cleopatra arrived as a myth. Her golden barge glided up the Cydnus River, its purple sails catching the wind, silver oars flashing like blades in the sun. Incense wafted from the deck, and attendants dressed as cupids fanned their queen, reclining under a gilded canopy. Antony, waiting on the shore, was outmatched before she spoke. Stepping ashore, Cleopatra didn't bow. She greeted him as an equal, her presence a masterstroke of theater and power, per Cassius Dio. What was meant to be an interrogation dissolved into enchantment. Within days, Antony was hers, not just captivated, but outmaneuvered. Cleopatra had swapped one Roman general for another, but this time she set the rules. As Antony followed her to Alexandria, history echoed itself. A queen bending empires with a mind sharper than any Roman sword. When Antony entered Alexandria at Cleopatra's side, it was as if Caesar's shadow lingered, but the stage was hers. The city, radiant under her rule, embraced their arrival with feasts and spectacles, per Plutarch.
Cleopatra, now in her late 20s, wielded Egypt's wealth like a weapon, funding Antony's campaigns while binding him closer with charm and strategy. Their partnership was no mere romance. It was a calculated alliance, with Cleopatra as the architect. She saw in Antony a man whose appetites could be harnessed, his loyalty secured through shared ambition. Together, they dreamed of a new order, one where Egypt and Rome might merge under their rule, and Caesarians. But Rome's eyes were on them, and Octavian's quiet ambition loomed, ready to turn their passion into a battlefield, per Appian. Cleopatra, ever the rogue, played for keeps, her every move a step toward immortality, in a world where empires rose and fell on the edge of a blade. Mark Antony, another Roman ensnared by Egypt's allure, found himself outmatched by Cleopatra, no longer the young queen fighting for survival, but a master strategist in her prime. With Caesar dead and Rome split between Antony and Octavian, Cleopatra saw her chance not just to secure Egypt, but to reshape the world, per Plutarch's Life of Antony.
Their partnership, ignited by passion, was cemented by power.
Cleopatra dazzled Antony with feasts of gold-laden tables, rivers of wine, and spectacles that outshone Rome's austerity per Cassius Dio's Roman history. They dubbed themselves the inimitable livers, lovers living as gods. But beneath the revelry lay a deadly calculus. Cleopatra needed a shield against Rome's ambitions. Antony needed her wealth to fund his Parthian campaigns. Love was their mask, power their truth. She bore him 3 children, twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, each a symbol of their shared dream per Appian civil wars. To Egyptians, she was Isis reborn. To Romans, a siren who'd corrupted another hero. Antony's lavish grants of eastern territories to Cleopatra and their children, known as the donations of Alexandria, enraged Rome's Senate, per Plutarch. They saw treason. Antony saw a new empire centered in Alexandria, not the Tiber. Octavian, Caesar's cunning heir, wielded this as a weapon, painting Antony as a lovesick pawn of an Egyptian queen bent on enslaving Rome, per Suetonius's Life of Augustus.
The lie was potent, fueling outrage that culminated in the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, a clash that shattered their dreams. That tragedy, sealed in naval defeat and their eventual deaths, would cement Cleopatra's immortality as the queen who dared to bend empires. As she stood on her palace balcony, Antony's laughter echoing below and her children dreaming, Cleopatra knew her legend, forged through love, betrayal, and ambition, would outlive Rome itself, per the Augustan history. In ancient Egypt, death was not an end, but a gateway to eternity, a belief that shaped Cleopatra's world as much as her politics. Life was a fleeting prelude to the afterlife, where the soul, or Ka, required a preserved body to anchor its journey, per the Book of the Dead. Mummification, a sacred art perfected over millennia, transformed the dead into divine vessels. When death was pronounced, a 70-day ritual began, led by priests of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, per Herodotus' histories.
These servants of Anubis were no mere morticians, but keepers of cosmic order, purifying themselves with sacred water and incense before chanting hymns to awaken the deceased's spirit. In the Wabet, the embalming workshop, the air was thick with natron salts and resin, an effigy of Anubis watching over every precise step. The body, laid on a slanted stone table, was cleansed with palm wine and Nile water, symbolic of rebirth, while offerings of bread, beer, and perfume nourished the Ka, per Diodorus Siculus. Organs were meticulously removed, preserved in 4 canopic jars, each guarded by a son of Horus, per ancient Egyptian texts like the Pyramid texts. The stomach rested under Duamotep, the jackal-headed, the intestines under Quebesanuf, the falcon-headed, the lungs and liver under Hapi and Imseti. Every act was ritual, every gesture a step toward immortality, ensuring the deceased could navigate the afterlife's trials. This sacred craft, as much as Cleopatra's political gambits, was about defying death's finality, preserving a legacy for eternity.
Her own end, whether by asp or poison, would echo this belief.
a queen ensuring her myth endured beyond the grave, as vibrant as the mummies of her ancestors. The canopic jars, each guarded by a son of Horus, stood as sacred sentinels beside the coffin. Hapi, with the head of a baboon, watched over the lungs. Imseti, human-faced, guarded the liver. Dwamotef protected the stomach, and Kebeh-Senouf the intestines, per the pyramid texts. These vessels weren't mere containers, but divine companions for the afterlife. With the organs secured, the priests cleansed the body's cavity with aromatic resins, myrrh, cassia, cinnamon, then packed it with linen, sawdust, and spices to restore its form and scent, per Herodotus's histories. The incision was sealed with wax and resin, hidden as if the body had never been touched. In the silent Wabet, the priests weren't just preserving flesh, they were sculpting a vessel for eternity, a form worthy of the gods. Every gesture, every chant was a step toward defying death's chaos, ensuring the Ka, the soul, could return to its home.
The drying phase, the heart of mummification, spanned 40 days, a sacred period to banish mortality's decay, per Diodorus Siculus. In a cool, shadowed chamber, the body was laid on a slanted stone table and buried in natron, a divine salt from Egypt's desert lakes, revered as a gift from the gods for its power to draw out moisture, per the Book of the Dead. Head to toe, the body lay entombed in this crystalline shroud, the desert air working in tandem with natron's alchemy to pull every trace of corruption from flesh and bone. Silence ruled the chamber, broken only by the priest's occasional visits, burning incense and chanting to Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian of this transformation. Outside, the family kept a 40-day vigil, offering bread, beer, oils, and flowers to soothe the Ka, suspended between worlds in a liminal state, neither living nor dead, per ancient Egyptian funerary texts. The ritual was a bridge to eternity, each step deliberate, each moment sacred. When the priests finally lifted the body from its natron tomb, the sight was breathtaking. The flesh, darkened and taut, retained uncanny clarity. Fingers, lips, even eyelashes frozen in time, per archaeological findings from Egyptian mummies. Gently brushing away the salt, the priests washed the body with fragrant oils, cedar, myrrh, lotus, restoring suppleness and sealing it against decay. This was the first glimpse of immortality, a human no longer bound by earthly frailty, but prepared for a celestial journey. The 40 days had stripped away mortality, leaving a divine vessel for the Ka. The priests' chants to Osiris, Lord of the Dead, filled the chamber, proclaiming the body's readiness for eternity, a testament to Egypt's belief that death was merely a door. The restoration phase followed, a sacred act of reassembly to ensure the gods would recognize the deceased in the afterlife. The priests, hands slick with cedar, myrrh, frankincense, and lotus oils, anointed every limb, each oil carrying spiritual weight, some to soften skin,
others to ward off decay, all to invoke divine favor, per the Book of the Dead. Invocations to Osiris and Hathor, goddess of rebirth, accompanied each stroke, reawakening the body's essence. Fine linen, soaked in resin, wrapped each finger and toe, the priests whispering the deceased's name to preserve their identity per funerary inscriptions. Amulets, gold scarabs, lapis lazuli eyes of Horus, Ankh symbols were tucked between layers, each a protective charm. The scarab for renewal, the eye for healing, the Ankh for resurrection. Over the chest, a heart amulet, shaped like a sacred beetle, guarded the soul's judgment in the hole of Maat, silencing any sins that might tip Anubis's scales, per the papyrus of Ani. The body, now a divine mosaic, was ready to face eternity, its mortal form reborn as a god's vessel. With the body's cavity filled with perfumed linen and resins, myrrh, cassia, and cinnamon, the priests restored its human shape, a fragrant temple for the Ka, per Herodotus' histories. The limbs were gently positioned, the mouth slightly parted to allow the soul to breathe anew in the afterlife. The chief embalmer, masked as Anubis, touched a bronze tool to the forehead, reciting the ritual of transformation, a sacred incantation drawn from the pyramid texts.
Amulets, gold scarabs, lapis lazuli eyes of Horus, Ankh symbols were tucked between layers at the heart, throat, and abdomen, each shielding against afterlife perils. A large scarab amulet, inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead, rested over the chest to silence the heart during the weighing of the soul, ensuring it wouldn't betray the deceased in the Hall of Ma'at. A Jud pillar, symbolizing Osiris' stability, adorned the throat for resurrection, per the papyrus of Ani. The head was wrapped with care, layer upon layer, brushed with resin to form a hardened, seamless shell. A golden mask, or painted cartonnage for the less wealthy, crowned the face, an eternal visage for the gods. When the priests stepped back, the human was gone, replaced by a radiant, godlike figure, its diamond-patterned wrappings a map of eternity. Yet the mummy, though perfect, remained lifeless, a sacred shell awaiting its spark. The opening of the mouth ceremony, the final and most profound ritual, reawakened the senses, reconnecting body and soul for the afterlife, per the Book of the Dead. At dawn, priests gathered before the upright or coffined mummy, the chief officiant donning Anubis's mask and wielding the peshkef, a chisel-like tool modeled after childbirth instruments, symbolizing rebirth into eternity per archaeological studies. The air thickened with myrrh and frankincense as chants to Osiris and Horus echoed. Offerings of bread, beer, and milk, sustenance for the Ka, were laid before the mummy, while holy water and sand circles marked the boundary between worlds. The peshkef touched the mummy's mouth, eyes, ears, and nose, restoring speech, sight, hearing, and breath per the pyramid texts. Each gesture was a prayer, each touch
a bridge to the divine, ensuring the deceased could live again in the field of reeds. The ceremony was no mere ritual, but a cosmic act, transforming the mummy into a vessel ready to face eternity's trials. This ritual, like Cleopatra's own defiance of death through her legacy, was Egypt's ultimate rebellion against mortality. Her story, woven through alliances with Caesar and Antony, mirrored the meticulous care of mummification, crafting an eternal image that outlasted empires.
The priest's work ensured the deceased's name and soul endured, just as Cleopatra's cunning ensured her legend as the queen who bent Rome to her will, per Plutarch's Life of Antony. In Egypt, death was not an end, but a transformation, and Cleopatra, like the mummies of her ancestors, became a myth preserved for eternity. The opening of the mouth ceremony reached its climax as the chief priest, masked as Anubis, touched the peshkef to the mummy's lips, eyes, ears, and nose, chanting, "May your mouth speak truth, your eyes see Ra's light, your nostrils breathe eternal life, per the Book of the Dead." With each touch, the mummy ceased to be a mere shell, becoming a living vessel for the afterlife, per the pyramid texts. Offerings of bread, beer, and milk were placed before it, consumed spiritually by the awakened Ka, a ritual Egyptians believed was as real as life itself, per Diodorus Siculus. This was no metaphor, but a cosmic bridge, transforming silence into speech, death into continuity.
The soul, reconnected to its body, was ready to face the gods, its name spoken to ensure it would echo forever. In Egypt, a name remembered was a life unending, a belief Cleopatra herself wielded, her legend crafted to outlast empires. The burial ceremony, the final act, was a grand procession to deliver the soul to eternity, per Herodotus's histories. At sunrise, priests, mourners, and family trekked across the desert to the tomb, bearing the mummy in a gilded coffin adorned with hieroglyphs and images of Isis's wings, Horus's eye, and the Ankh of life, per archaeological records. Flutes wailed mournfully, and professional mourners echoed Isis's lament for Osiris, their cries piercing the dawn. Before the tomb, priests performed final purifications, sprinkling Nile water and burning myrrh, while offerings, bread, beer, onions, wine, were laid out with spells from the Book of the Dead to shield the soul from hunger or harm. The tomb's chamber, its walls painted with vivid scenes of the soul sailing with Ra or hunting in lush fields, was a portal to paradise, per the papyrus of Ani.
Canopic jars, Ushapti figurines, jewelry and combs surrounded the coffin, ensuring the deceased's comfort in eternity. As the coffin was lowered into the sarcophagus, priests sealed the chamber, chanting, "May your soul dwell forever in the field of reeds." The mourners departed, leaving offerings at the entrance, the wind carrying their prayers across the silent sands. In the sealed tomb, the Ka, life force, and Ba, personality, embarked on their perilous journey through the Duat, the shadowy underworld, guided by spells inscribed on tomb walls and papyrus scrolls, per the Book of the Dead. The Ba, depicted as a human-headed bird, navigated caverns of serpents, lakes of fire, and guardians demanding sacred passwords, each trial a test of the deceased's earthly virtue, per the pyramid texts. At the Hall of Ma'at, Anubis weighed the heart against Ma'at's feather of truth, with Thoth, the ibis-headed god, recording the outcome, per the papyrus of Ani. A light heart, free of sin, earned Osiris's blessing. You are justified. A heavy heart was devoured by Amit, the lion, crocodile, hippopotamus beast, erasing the soul forever.
Those who passed became an Ak, a radiant spirit, sailing with Ra across eternal skies, per Diodorus Siculus. The mummified body remained a haven for the Ka, sustained by offerings, ensuring the soul could return to earth or roam the heavens. This intricate art of mummification mirrored Cleopatra's own defiance of mortality. Her alliances with Caesar and Antony, her crafting of a divine image, were her own rituals to ensure her name endured, per Plutarch's Life of Antony. Like the priests who wrapped bodies in linen and spells, she wove a legacy that transcended death, her story as eternal as the mummies resting under Ra's sun. For Egyptians, immortality was no fantasy, but a craft, perfected layer by layer, ensuring the soul's triumph over oblivion. Cleopatra, the queen who bent Rome to her will, mastered this art in life, her myth a radiant Ak that still shines across history's vast Duat.